The Hyperdimension Neptune series has been prevalent to say the least. With over a dozen games under its belt, it becomes almost inescapable, and at some point you're going to take part in it in one way or another. I'm Alexis Nascimento-Lejoie, and this is the video review supplemental for Superdimension Neptune vs Sega Hard Girls. Superdimension Neptune vs Sega Hard Girls' presentation is overall pretty average. Dungeon designs are bland, with none of them being in any way creative or memorable. From generic forests to generic ruins, none of the dungeons leave much of an impression. Character designs make up for this shortcoming, however, with each character having a very distinct look to them while also accurately conveying their personality through their design to the audience. Combat animations are also pretty nice, with flashy and expressive special attack animations that give the combat a bit more flair to it. The game offers very little in terms of substantive combat, and with a running time of around 20 hours, it starts to become very noticeable. The combat system is a pretty basic turn-based system that has a movement mechanic that doesn't add a whole lot to combat. There's not much strategic benefit to positioning your party members outside of making sure they don't clump up during boss fights. It's also made moot with the Fever mode, which makes the entire game trivial. Fever mode is the only way to effectively beat bosses, as it not only prevents them from attacking during its duration, but also allows the use of your party's strongest moves, with the only cost being the Fever gauge. Since Fever mode requires grinding enemies in order to get, if you know there's an upcoming boss fight, you can simply grind it out and remove any challenge the boss might have posed. Side quests also suffer from the same problem of being unsubstantive. Every side quest will have you doing the same thing, either killing enemies to get an X amount of items or simply killing an X amount of enemies. These side quests are also directly linked to a party member's growth, so if you want to make the most out of your party, be ready to play the long game. Luckily, this is made a little less tedious with the game actually giving you options to reduce grinding depending on which quests you've completed. It's a shame side quests turned out this way because they're attached to a fairly interesting mechanic. Completing side quests add to your history level, which allows you to buy better items and gear for your party, as well as prevent the game's final boss from getting stronger. Failing to complete a side quest in time will make the final encounter that much more difficult, to the point where you're most likely to restart the cycle and try again. The game's soundtrack is wholly forgettable, with none of the songs staying with me after playing it except for the library music, but that could be attributed to the frequency I visited the place rather than the actual song itself. The Japanese voice cast does a really good job throughout the course of the game, although none of them really stood out as exceptional. The English dub is also good, so if you prefer your games in English, then the dub does a serviceable job in that regard. Superdimension Neptune vs Sega Hard Girls' strongest point is by far its writing. The story itself is actually pretty simple. Our main character IF teams up with the amnesiac Segami in order to travel through time to visit multiple eras in order to prevent the battles between the Sega Hard Girls and the goddesses. The plot is primarily comedic in nature, which is the right approach to take given the game's characters and aesthetic. The comedy is primarily mean-spirited in nature, with a sprinkling of fourth-wall-breaking humor, which provides some great juxtaposition between it and the main cast. It also helps that our leads are pretty crass and crude, which only adds to the comedy. My one complaint is that the cast kind of feels underwritten, but given the game's tone, it can easily be overlooked. Superdimension Neptune vs Sega Hard Girls does very little to keep the player interested. As a jumping off point, Superdimension Neptune vs Sega Hard Girls probably won't leave the best impression on newcomers. While the story is enjoyable, it isn't enough to compensate for the gameplay's monotony. If you're a fan of this series, you'll definitely get more out of it than the average player. If you're looking to dip your toes into the JRPG genre, there are better games in which to do so.
Thank you for watching this video review. If you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and if you want to help us out, feel free to check out our Patreon page.